All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our little lunchtime chat about how to optimize your summer. Because we know we want this to be a fun and relaxing and family time, but of course, as parents, you always want to make sure that you are doing what you can to help either your kids catch up or get ahead as needed. So we're really excited to have you here today and to give you a little overview of what we will be talking about.
All right, so basically we're going to start off with a little bit of history about Baker and Bloom, give a bit of a background about developmental stages, also introduce some summer opportunities that we have here. And then the last little bit we'll end with some practical takeaway tips that you guys can do at home. So it'll be some more fun activities. And then we'll have some time for a Q&A as well.
So to introduce ourselves, my name is Rebecca Bush. I'm the head of the primary here at Baker and Bloom. I've been in education for quite a long time, and I've been at Baker and Bloom now for 3 years. I've taught all over the world, but I'm originally from the US.
All right, and so my name is Megan Kwan-Nixon. I'm from Vancouver. I moved to Hong Kong about a year and a half ago, and I've been teaching for the past 6-ish years, and I'm really excited to be here at Baker and Bloom.
All right, so to give you a little bit of an overview about Baker and Bloom and what we do here. So we are a K1 through 12th grade organization. So we have kindergarten, primary, and secondary. We're located here in Admiralty, Wan Chai, right across from Pacific Place 3. And our big focus is really on, as you can see at the bottom, what we call creative literacy, which I like to think of as being able to give our kids the skills to approach any problem, to think outside the box, to think creatively, and then of course to have that confidence to express their thoughts, express what they did. And that comes out in all of our different programs. So it might be that they're reading and writing, that might be that doing public speaking, they might be coding, but that they've got the literacy skills to express themselves. We have a bunch of different programs across that, which we will be talking a little bit more about as well. But our name Baker and Bloom really comes from the idea of this idea of flourishing and innovating. We want our kids to bloom as they learn and grow with us.
All right, so one of the things that sets us as an education center apart from all the other education centers in Hong Kong is our 4-leaf approach. So the 4-leaf approach is, well, as you can see on the slides, language arts and communication, learning how to learn. Creativity is also in the forefront of every single one of our classes. And then we also really value leadership and service. So that's something that all 4 of these elements are always in every single one of our lessons, every single one of our programs. So that's something that really sets us apart here in Hong Kong.
Yeah, and so we are an education center, as I said, K through 12, but we're also branching off, and we are starting our own primary school. It's called Bloom KKCA Academy. It will be starting this coming September in Shek Kip Mei, and we're really, really excited to bring the same philosophy that we have as an education center to get kids future ready, to think outside the box and do things a little bit differently and a little creatively. And we'll be doing that in our bilingual innovative school, which will be starting in September. So if you're looking for a new primary school, please reach out as well. But to get into kind of some of the things that we're really here to talk about today. So we're going to start off by giving you just a really big glimpse of what to expect based on the age and stage. And we include that stage in there because kids do develop at different rates. So we want to not only look at how old they are, but more importantly, what stage are they at in these different developmental continua. So we'll go through the different year bands and just kind of give you a glimpse of what to expect for each of the ages and stages.
All right, so just in order to keep everything kind of organized according to the age appropriate expectations, we've made this little acronym here, PALS. So P for physical, A for academic, really just focusing not just on the cognitive thinking, L for linguistic, language development, and S for social emotional.
So to use our cute little acronym PALS to go through, to start off with that K through 1 age. So this is really one of the big ones. where kids are developing really quickly, right? We're seeing a lot of things happening. So using that acronym, you can see a lot of things that are going on there. But just to highlight a few of the things that are happening then, as far as linguistically, sometimes there are still sounds that they're not able to make yet. So for example, the CH sound, ch, or the L sound, ul. So those are things you want to be keeping an eye on and addressing, but also keep in mind that as they develop, they might not be there yet with those sounds. And the other big thing is on the social emotional side. I always like to say that they're kind of leaving the I am the world stage and they're entering the stage where, oh, there are other kids and there are other things going on. But keep in mind that they still have a foot in that kind of I am the world stage, because they're just beginning to understand and recognize what feelings are, what opinions are, how to recognize them themselves and in others as well. So to give you an example of a K1-3 work, so this would be a K3 student using this story mountain to think about how to start to develop their own stories. So in K1-3, a lot of the work that they'll be doing is still very oral, it's very drama based, but we want to be thinking about getting that the structure of a story in place. So having that beginning, middle, and end, and starting to think about how stories work. They're also starting to be ready to follow multi-step directions. So, really by the time they're 3 or 4, they're going to be getting about 3 or 4 steps in those directions and working their way through. And also one thing I forgot to mention, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to pop them in the chat box as well, and we'll address any questions at the end.
All right, so moving on to around the grade 1-2 age. Developmentally, their curiosity is still growing. So one of the best things to do is to actually do active activities with them, because that's really how they make sense of the world, by interacting, thinking, and socializing. One of the more like the progressional parts is that in linguistically, they're going to begin to understand a lot more compared to the previous stages, and developed a bit more of a nuanced language. So you will be able to see that development. Another huge part, just hopping on the social emotional part, they're beginning to understand more complex feelings like right and wrong, and start to have those feelings and opinions, and then start to actually develop empathy. So they're still progressing out of that centered stage, but just developing more and adding more skills to it. All right, so I guess this is an example of student work, grade 1 student work, and this is provided with structure from a teacher. I want to really highlight the last 3 bullet points, where they're trying to express feelings with words. They're using the words to convince people of their viewpoint and to tell stories. So they're really using that language for a purpose. It's going to be a little bit more organized than just a run-on sentence. And at this stage, they're going to start to be able to tell jokes and riddles and maybe understand simple puns. So that's a huge kind of growth in development language-wise.
Moving on into grade 3 and 4, this is where we start to see some really big leaps around particularly that cognitive development. They're able to start to think a lot more abstractly and a lot more logically. They're not there yet, but they're on their way. So those problem solving skills are going to become a lot more independent at this age. This is also where we see a big leap in language. So they're going to start to use new words. They might mispronounce a few words when they're first giving them a go, but you'll see that change in the cognitive thinking and the linguistic as well. Socially, can be sometimes a tricky time, because they're again moving into that much more self-aware stage, where they're starting to recognize, who they are and who the popular kids are, and they really want to fit in. And so sometimes you can see this be a bit of a rough patch, social emotionally. So that's one thing as parents, just to keep an eye on and make sure that you're there to support them with that as well. But moving on to show you an example of a grade 3-4 work. So again, this would be something that they had some teacher support with. But first of all, you can see, we're writing with paragraphs. We're writing a lot longer. The sentence structure is starting to get a little bit more complex. You'll also start to see at this point, they're able to really make all of the sounds when they're speaking. So you're going to see that pronunciation start to become a lot clearer than it would have been previously. and their vocabulary. So this is where we really see that switch from learning to read to reading to learn, which is where we hope to see that vocabulary and that academic knowledge and the background knowledge really start to blossom and take off.
All right, so moving on to the grade 5-6 age range. This is probably the most, in terms of development, big changes are going to happen, start to happen around this age. And for me as a teacher, or for us as teachers, all of us, I think we're always more sensitive to this age group because they're going to be feeling different things and they're a little bit more sensitive towards themselves. So one thing to keep in mind is that when your child is actually doing writing and sharing their feelings, to acknowledge that, and also to be a little bit more aware of any kind of critique or criticism, and try to just encourage them to really develop their language and continue that growth. Their language and their ideas will become more abstract and complex at this stage. So you'll see a lot of growth and maturity happen here as well. All right, so this is an example of a grade 5 student work. So they're retelling a story, and you'll see that the sentence structure is actually more complex. It's not just simple sentences. So even though it may not seem like, oh, it's not very long, but you'll read and you'll see the sentences are obviously more complex. The vocabulary has started to change. And this is where you'll start to see students use metaphor, slang, different types of figurative language a little more naturally, not just like we get the kids to use metaphors, and sometimes it might not make sense, but they're trying. But grade 5-6, they're going to start using it, and they're going to start to really comprehend what they're actually writing.
And one thing to note about all of these writing samples is two things. So one, this was of course with teacher support. So they had the pre-write, they had the draft. They didn't just have a piece of paper thrown in front of them. They had a lot of, brain work and pre-write to get them going exactly. And then these are kind of, sort of ideal examples that we can see. And that's one thing really what we're trying to convey with all of this as well. All of these things are continuums, right? It takes time for kids to get there. And as a reading specialist, I say this all the time, writing really is one of the hardest things we can ever do as human beings. It takes almost every single part of our brain working in conjunction to get a quality piece down on paper or computer. So we need to make sure that we give our kids the time and the space to build their confidence and their skills as they move towards becoming more skilled readers and writers. But to move on to our final grade level, grade 7 and 8, these guys they're properly in those middle school years now. So this is where we see maturity kick in, right? They're hit puberty. Oftentimes the boys will have shot up in growth. So physically there's a lot of changes going on, of course, but mentally as well. So their brains are still growing and developing at this point, but we start to see a lot more of those sort of thinking and executive functioning skills starting to kick in. Of course, with all of these things that we need to keep in mind as well is that, no offense, boys, guys, it's just facts. Girls mature more quickly than boys do. So you will see that happen a lot more quickly with your daughters than you will with your sons, but they will get there. But this is where that linguistic skill has really been kicking in as well. So they've had a couple of years where they've been in that learning, or they've been in the reading to learn stage. So their academic vocabulary, their background knowledge, all of these things have blossomed a lot as well. And that starts to come up more and more in their writing and in their verbal communication and how they're speaking as well. So not necessarily how they might be talking with their friends, but when they're asked to talk or write in an academic setting, that's where you start to see that a lot more come out. And as an example of their writing, so you can see this is poetry, right? Poetry really is one of the hardest things we can write because we have to have the figurative language, we have to have vocabulary, we have to have all of these skills around the language in place in order to write a poem. And so by the time we get to those middle years, they've been working on all of these skills and they're able to start to produce sometimes some really great poems. And you'll also see that abstract thinking come out a lot more. So those kind of what if scenarios, a lot more of the inferential thinking, the kind of connecting the dots sort of thinking will start to happen. They oftentimes are a bit more eloquent about their debates and opinions. They might have reasons to support what they're saying, but they still are working on that linguistic development. So that grammar knowledge and the vocabulary, it still is developing, and that will continue on through secondary and even on through the university years as well. But as Megan was playing out with all of this, sometimes they can use their writing to describe personal experiences and some of maybe the social and emotional hardships they're going through. And so that's where you guys can be really supportive as parents and acknowledge that writing can be a safe space to share these thoughts and ideas as well.
All right, so the exciting part, summer opportunities at Baker and Bloom. So personally, I think we're all really excited about these because I think that we have a very good pulse on what kids need here in Hong Kong. And so all the teachers that we have, they've really curated some amazing courses across the year bands that really focus in on the fundamentals and creative opportunities and just lots of opportunities that we'll go through and we'll share. So we're really excited about this part. All right, so for here, this is kind of our breakdown of how we've organized everything into these 6 little colorful categories: reading, writing, deep dives, fundamentals, STEM, and public speaking. These are the courses that we offer across the grades. One thing that we do really want to push and make sure is that even though they're all split into different categories right now, like for example, fundamentals, you're going to be reading, you're going to be writing, you're going to be learning all of those different core elements. It's not like whatever activity is labeled within R is only reading. You will be working on all of the amazing elements of writing and you'll be learning, but it's just like a stronger reading focus maybe, but you will be getting all aspects of reading with the grammar, structure, and everything as well. And then just down at the bottom, they don't have labels, but these are other classes that we offer. So we have Chinese classes for the summer, academic coaching, one-on-one, private classes. So sometimes we just create a little group of 3, and then we pair you up with the teacher, internship opportunities, project opportunities, and admission support as well. So we have quite a range of opportunities here at Baker and Bloom. And hopefully there's one that kind of interests you or interests your child.
So yeah, so now that we've done a little bit of talking about kind of what to expect, and hopefully you have an idea of what areas you would be looking to support your children with, we can use these different categories to think about how to support that. But as Megan was saying, all of our classes are very holistic. So even if it is reading, you cannot learn reading in isolation. All 4 language domains go together: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We have to build them up together. And going back to our mission of being creative and having that critical thinking, we're going to do all of this stuff in really fun, kid-friendly, summer-friendly ways. Because when kids have fun, they're learning without even realizing they're learning. So that's what we'll be doing. So we'll go through the different grade levels and give you guys an overview of the classes we're doing. And then we'll highlight a few examples from each age year, from each year band, so that you can see, kind of what it is that we do here. All right, so starting off with our little guys, our K1-3. So just as a side note too, we use the American level. So K1-3 would be up to 6 years old, so 3 to 6. But what we do with all of our kids too is whenever they join us, we straight away do a diagnostic. So we can see exactly where your children are in these different areas. And then we can recommend ages and classes as well. But as you can see, we've got a range of classes with these little guys. The one that I'm really, really excited about is one of our new courses called Storytime Yoga. So one of our teachers here, not only is she an incredibly talented elementary and kindergarten teacher, she's also a kiddie yoga instructor. So what we'll be doing in that class is kids, particularly little kids, they need to move. And when they move and they do, that's when they learn. So they'll be using their bodies and using the idea of yoga to understand how stories work, particularly looking at that structure. So like the sample we showed you before, one of the big things we want to get across as to build up to that reading and writing with the little guys is the structure of a story, having that beginning, middle, and end. And they can use their bodies, they can use the different poses that they're learning to create their own stories. And they'll also be having some really great vocabulary development with that as well. So that is a deep dive, but it really is looking at building the sort of foundations of reading and writing through a very fun, kinesthetic, moving way.
All right, so for grades 1 to 2, these are the 7 different courses that we offer. The one that I'm actually going to talk about is Power of Descriptions, the label D. So D stands for deep dive. So this one, we really want to increase, well, obviously it says descriptions. So when you're boosting descriptions, you're automatically going to be talking about sensory descriptions, how to actually physically experience the world. So just similar to what Rebecca said about experiencing, when kids actually have experiences, they're going to be able to write and articulate what they're thinking a little easier. So this is a writing focus activity for this age group, which will boost for the next age, because grade 3, 4, they will be continuing to write a lot about descriptions too. So having that opportunity in grade 1 and 2 to just get in tune with how to think and how to process and how to come up with creative descriptions, this is a great like little head start booster for the next year. Also, just for the in every slide there is a little call to action, so you can use the QR code to just kind of check out all the little descriptions and things as well.
And yeah, one of the things that we want to do with every age, but really with those younger kids, is we want to build up the vocabulary and build up that baseline of knowledge. Because what happens a lot when we get to grade 3 and 4 is we see what we call the 4th grade slump. As we move into upper primary, things automatically become a lot harder. The requirements around their reading and their writing jump big time. They're asked to actually read and understand independently. They're asked to, and then do something about it. They're asked to write independently. And there has to be a lot of stuff in place for them to be able to do that. And one of the big things, particularly, you know, in a place like Hong Kong, where we're talking about kids growing up that are multilingual, is we want to make sure that we boost that language development. And that doesn't have to be in one language or the other, but we want to, as much as possible, give them a really rich vocabulary so that they're then able to describe and do all these things that we want them to do. So keeping in mind that 4th grade slump, one of the classes that I'll highlight in our year 3-4, in our grade 3-4 year band, is the Don't Forget to Have Fundamentals. So this really is a focus on those fundamental skills. But again, we're going to do it in a fun way. But we're going to look at those academic skills that are going to set them up for the rest of primary. And so really what we're doing is we're going to hit pause, make sure they've actually learned all the stuff in lower primary they should have before we move up into upper primary. And a lot of that is going to be around the grammar, the sentence structure, because that's one of the things that changes a lot as they move up into upper primary. The way sentences are written gets a lot harder. And that will be, as with all of our fundamental classes, all of those F classes, they're personalized for each student, at least to some extent as well. So they are group classes. All of our classes are capped at 6, so they're small classes anyway. But that one is one that's even a little bit more personalized. So when they come in, we'll do a diagnostic to see where their gaps and where their strengths are. And then throughout the week, the teacher will be tailoring the course and the lesson plans a little bit to help fill those gaps. But yeah, we want to make sure that with that grade 3 and 4 that we really do kind of hit pause and make sure that we actually have learned everything. And I think that's even more relevant, you know, looking on the past year and a half, with almost a year and a half with COVID and online learning and all the disruptions we've had. This is a really important age to make sure that we do actually have those fundamentals in place. So that's our grade 3-4 classes.
All right, so next is grade 5-6. So we have these amazing opportunities for your kids, but I'm really just going to focus on the creative writing, painting with words. So again, this is the opportunity to have that chance for your kids to really visually see the world and use their imagination and really look at some art pieces and lots of different kinds of examples, not just text, to see the world in a different light and start to use words to describe and explain and make sense of it. So this one, through different art pieces, they're going to have that chance to practice all the writing crafts and learn different skills and strengthen alongside all of these things working holistically together. So again, just to repeat, like all of our classes work together using different elements to build up their strength and writing skills.
Yeah, and this is one I remember that when we were teaching this class last summer, I was so jealous watching the class happening. So I was like, oh, I want to be in there doing what they're doing. It looked like so much fun. They didn't even realize that they were actually gaining all of these incredible writing skills through the course. And then moving on to our secondary, middle and secondary courses. So these, you'll notice they do start to take a little bit more of an academic specific focus. Of course, we still do it in a very age and stage appropriate way. We want to make sure that the kids have particularly the confidence to do these things. You know, and that sometimes that's one of the things that can take a hit with this age as well, as that confidence piece. But obviously in secondary, there's a lot of academic demands. So we're going to do what we can to support those. So there's a number of different courses, but the one that I'll focus on is our super reader. And I think this is a really fun class because one, as a reading specialist, I know how hard these things are. But the great thing about this class is that the kids get to choose what they're going to be reading. And really after they choose what they're reading and looking at the different kinds of literary texts, they're going to have, as it says, a bespoke tour of these things. So they get to choose what they're reading, but no matter what they're reading, they're going to be walking away with really key strategies that they can use to attack any piece that they're asked to read and analyze. So it'll be looking at that whole reading process. So what kind of text is it? How am I going to address it? How am I going to analyze it? And then of course, how am I going to write that essay about it? Because that's one of the things that they're really going to have to be very, very skilled and efficient at to be successful in secondary and university as well. Moving on to some of our other classes.
So we also have Inspired Chinese. For more information, obviously, I've taken the screenshot right here, but you can also use the QR code to find out more information. It's split into different grades. So whatever your child kind of needs or you're interested in.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions about Chinese, please do reach out to us. I don't speak Chinese, so I can't help you, but we have lots of people who can. So we've talked a lot about, you know, what to expect with different ages and stages. We've walked you through some of the specific classes that we have here in Baker and Bloom. We really, really hope that you come and join us for these fantastic courses we have going on. I think especially, you know, with COVID, we're not able to travel maybe as much as we'd like to, but there's still some really fun stuff we can do with our kids here in Hong Kong. And moving on from that with some other practical tips. So because we'll be here, we also wanted to give you guys a couple of big things that you can do to just help support your kids no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are. So we'll walk our way through some of these big tips that you guys can do with your kids. And these are for really any age or stage. Oops. So this is one of the big ones. Read together, and it's not just reading together; it's actually reading aloud. So this can be you reading to them reading to you. You guys could be sharing books, but the act of reading aloud actually has really so many benefits. And we could be here for an hour just me telling you all the benefits of reading aloud. But one of the things that I think is really interesting being in Hong Kong, you know. This is such an amazing city and we have such a rich educational environment here. But if we actually look at the percentage of Hong Kong parents who are actively reading to their children, we have one of the lowest rates of any developed country in the world. So actually the national average, the international average is 39% of parents who read to their kids on a regular basis. In Hong Kong, it's 13. So there's a lot of things that come out of this. So long story short, please read to your kids. But one of the things I would like to highlight of that is that social and that emotional development that can happen through reading, particularly about empathy. And there's so many fantastic picture books out there. So if there's there's an issue that you're having or your kids are struggling with something, there's a picture book to talk about that. So definitely I would recommend finding those books and sharing them with you, or sharing them with your kids and reading aloud.
All right, so tip number 2 is let your child choose what they want to read. So a lot of the time, parents come up to us and they say, my child doesn't really love reading at home, or it's really difficult to get him or her to read. What can I do? So the easiest way to kind of solve that is to let your child choose their own book. When they choose the book that they feel comfortable reading, maybe it's because the word choice is a little easier. Maybe it's easier for them to comprehend. There's so many kind of things to consider when you're choosing a book to read, and especially when they're young. It's all about the comfort level. So of course you can kind of expose them to a bunch of different types of stories, but when it comes for them to choose a story, let them choose what they want to read. So Rebecca and I are actually talking about graphic novels in particular, because graphic novels tend to have this like bad rap. They're like, oh, they're not real books, but they actually are. So when I was in university, I actually read a bunch of graphic novels for our English lit classes, and they're a beautiful way to actually tell a story. Sometimes there's a lot of complex situations that happen, so it's easier to actually show with like an illustration, dialogue. They're learning so many different types of writing techniques and structure, all within something that they may find enjoyable. So they are learning those skills. So we're just really want to push that. Like if your child really gravitates towards a graphic novel, don't be scared about that. Let them have that chance to read it, enjoy it. Maybe they're going to acquire some information. Maybe you can even have a chat with them about it, what they're reading, so you can read with them too, or something like that, right? So graphic novels are okay.
Yes, they are. Yeah, I'm a big fan of graphic novels, and I'm not saying comic books, but actual graphic novels, because they still have the plot and character and vocabulary complexity of real books, or just in a little bit easier format. And we also, on our website, we have all kinds of resources where you can go find different, if you're looking for a different book or a different podcast or anything, we've got a resource list on our website of that. And there's also, if you're looking for particular books, especially picture books to be sharing with your kids, there's a nonprofit here in Hong Kong, Bring Me a Book. They actually have their own search engine where you can go on and look for picture books of whatever you want. They have over 100 different filters that you can put on there to find books. But moving on to our next tip. Summer scrapbook. I absolutely love this. And again, Meg and I, when we were putting together this presentation, we were both going on about how we absolutely loved scrapbooks when we were kids. And this is, I think, a really fun way, especially if you're not traveling this summer, to kind of help still make it a really fun, enjoyable time, is to catalog what you're doing here. There's so many fantastic things on offer in our city. I mean, hikes and museums and different restaurants. There's all kinds of stuff happening. And one of the really great things about scrapbooks is you can use it as a fun way to be hitting some of those developmental milestones that we were talking about earlier. So with the little guys, for example, there's so much fine motor development that can come out of this. You can be cutting and coloring and pasting and drawing. As they move up in their writing and becoming more and more fluent writers, they can be writing captions. They can be expanding the vocabulary as they're putting labels on things or describing things. Even if, as they get older, maybe they want to write a poem about something that's in their scrapbook. So you can use this fun way to help kind of bring the family together. And then you can also sort of sew in little bits to it that will be hitting those developmental milestones that we were looking for as well.
All right, so tip number 4, go old school, pen pals. So back in our day, we used to have pen pals all the time. We used to do it with like exchange in Quebec. And so we would practice our French. So just that language acquisition, it's a lot more meaningful when you're actually, you're talking to another human and you're going to get something back. So that exchange. So we're saying lots of people can't travel, but maybe we have lots of friends all around the world, maybe family. And right now, given the current situation, we can't really travel. So one way to stay connected while still working on your literacy skills is to have a pen pal. So pen pals actually have a huge, a lot of benefits for kids. So these are kind of the ones that we chose to highlight. But letter C, the Oakland University wrote that people who engage in cross-cultural pen pal relationships are more culturally intelligent and culturally sensitive. So because they said that, culturally intelligent, when you're exchanging with maybe someone that lives somewhere else, you can get to know a foreign country or learn about how the world works from another location. So you're not just focusing on what's happening in Hong Kong, what life is like in Hong Kong, because we really want to push that global perspective, because that's kind of where everything is headed. It's not just staying local, it's also getting to know what other places and other countries are like, their customs, how they speak, how to slang, like different types of nuances in language. It's a great way to get to know how to write better by having pen pals.
Yeah. And one thing about the pen pals too, especially if you can get them to actually write by hand, that's a huge benefit, because again, there's so many benefits that come from the physical act of writing by hand. So you can actually have it be a pen pal, you know, not an email pal. Moving on to our next tip. This is one that I think is really, really important. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but join in. You know, as kids, they are desperate to have adult models of what they're supposed to be doing throughout the day. And that can come out in academic tasks as well. I know even I was a classroom teacher for a long time, and now working as a reading specialist, and of course here at Baker and Bloom as well. I will never ask a child to read, particularly for silent reading, where they're reading for a significant amount of time, without actually sitting down and reading with them. They need to see that model of what it looks like to be doing these things. You know, so reading together, that first tip we started with, is a huge one. But anything else, you know, have discussions about what you're doing. Try to go on trips together. Ask them these questions. There's so much stuff that you can be doing together. And when it comes to that language development as well, particularly when we're talking about up to about 3rd grade, the biggest way that we gain language is through conversations. And the more we converse with adults and with older people, obviously the more advanced our linguistic skills will become. So even just having simple conversations with your kids is really, really important. And even when you're doing fun, active activities, maybe you're going to take the bus. Well, have them figure out what bus they're supposed to take. Have them lead you to the bus stop. There's so many cognitive skills that can be developed through that as well. And I think that point there at the bottom is really important, that creating a habit does take time. I know I've personally, there have been so many times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this a habit of mine. And then, you know, it kind of falls away, and then I try again. But it can take, you know, as you see there, over 2.5 months sometimes to make it really be a habit. You know, and that habit may be something as simple as, for 10 minutes at night or 10 minutes evening, everyone puts their devices away and you actually have some family time together. So yeah, join in, do things together, because that's when our kids really learn all of these different things that we want them to have.
All right. So we saw that a couple of questions were up in the chat box, and now we kind of want to open the floor. If there are any questions about anything that we talked about Baker and Bloom, about the developmental stages, any of the summer opportunities, any of the practical tips that we kind of discussed, feel free to use the chat box to ask your questions. I'm just gonna look here. There were a couple that were asked already.
Yeah, so just to start on some of the questions that were asked. So the big one would be about the grades. So the summer is kind of that funny area where we can sometimes be between grades. So that's where our diagnostic can be really helpful. We will meet your child, and then we'll let you know whether we think, particularly if they just finished 3rd grade or they just finished 2nd grade, for example, is it better to actually take a step up into a grade 3-4 year band class? Or maybe would it be a little bit better for them to hang out in that grade 1 and 2? So while we do mean the grades that they are going into, we can be really flexible with where we put kids, and that is 100% based on what they actually need. We want to meet kids where they are, and then move them along and give them that confidence and build those academic skills as well. So the other question was about the traditional, or the myths and stories. So that's another really fun class that just started. So they'll be looking at a range of myths. So there's some of the Greek myths that are in there, but it's a lot more focused on the Norse myths. And that's because actually the Thor movies, which come from original Norse mythology, kids are really familiar oftentimes with the Thor movies and those. So they already have a little bit of background knowledge around those myths. So then we can actually use that to strengthen the more academic side of things, where we're looking at character development and plot development, character traits, all of that stuff through really fun myths. And then there was a question about our summer program. So you might have joined us too late to miss that. But this is all of our classes in one go. So the way we run our classes is on an A-B schedule. So if you just depending on the dates, so you can have the kids come 2 weeks in a row and they won't do the same class twice. But that QR code there is a link to all of our courses. It gives you a lot more information. So all those screenshots that you saw in the presentation are from our catalog. It also will give you a lot more information around the fees and all of that as well. So even though if you might have missed it, these are all of our courses, and that QR code will take you exactly where you need to go. Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of great questions. So as far as classes, it depends on what you're doing around the summer. Some of our students might come just for one. Some students might be here for 2 at a time, or maybe 2 weeks at a time. So while our classes are really fun, you do also want to balance that out with some of that, the physical, the sports, whatever that might be as well. So I would say kind of 2 options would be to take one class a week for 2 different weeks. So you might do one class that is maybe more of a fundamental focus in the morning, and then the afternoon you can go do basketball or whatever. And then the next week, maybe you can take a deep dive class where you're, really building that creativity and vocabulary as well. Or if you wanted to do 2 classes in 1 week, I would say to balance them out. So to have maybe one is a STEM class and then one is a deep dive, or do something, like do storytime yoga and then go do coding or writing, but to have a balance of the classes. We would love to have you join us for the whole summer. We've got plenty of classes if you would like to do that as well. And we also, as we mentioned at the very beginning, we do private group classes. And I know this is something that's been a big support for a lot of parents with the difficulties of COVID. Because of online learning and just the lack of learning time we've had. I know a lot of parents, and I can say for myself as an educator as well, I've been really concerned about the lack of development that has happened due to COVID. So group classes can be a really great way to take this opportunity of the summer to give them a big boost. So the way the group classes work is they're private classes. So it might be, for example, one kid and 2 or 3 of their friends, all of the same, probably usually the same age or grade from a school, and they come to us and we develop a course based on their diagnostics, and then also looking at the specific school that they go to. So for example, if they're at this one international school, we have a lot of information about the curriculum there, about what's going on. So we can tailor make a program that will address whatever that group of kids need. So if you're interested in a group class as well, you could definitely use that same QR code, go to our website and reach out. And then what you would do is we would have a conversation with you to see, what it is that you're looking for and how we can help. And same with any of the questions. If you have specific questions, oh, my 7-year-old boy goes to this school, what classes do you recommend? We're always happy to have those conversations with you as well. Any other questions? Megan, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered it. Academic coaching is another way, the one-on-one coaching, if you really want to target any needs just specifically for your child, and maybe they want to have that privacy and that one-on-one time instead of doing it as a group with friends. That's totally fine too, because maybe they want to just really, really hone in on a specific skill, target, intensive course, and then ready for next year.
And with those coaching and private classes, they can be arranged too. So some of them can be a bit more of the kind of traditionally academic,
Mhm.
But one of the things that we can do too is sort of fun extension classes. So for example, one of our coaching kids, he is really, really into history. So he comes and the teacher he's with has chosen all of these different historical texts, and he's using that to just have fun learning about history. And then she's also kind of sneaking in all of the reading and writing strategies that he needs for his age. Another example of some of the private classes that we've done is we balance the writing and the creativity and the STEM. So there was a group of kids last summer who came, and they, through the STEM and coding, they actually created a board game. So they worked with amongst their friends to create the board game. They learned all of the coding to actually make it work as a digital game. And then they took that idea, and then the next week they moved with our creative writing coach, and she helped them write a story about the board game that they had created. So we were doing it very, very creatively, but balancing that kind of STEM side with the reading side, the reading and writing side, all in this fun class. And it was exactly what they wanted to be doing. So we can do really creative, fantastic things, just depending on what you guys are looking for.
I saw the question about reading time. So kind of depending on the age group, I think all kids love when parents read to them. They're gonna be like, oh, read me a story. They love that time. They crave that time. And I think that if you just kind of structure it as just like, oh, let's read the story together, instead of making it, okay, it's reading time, then they don't have that correlation of like, oh, it's reading time. If it's just something that's done naturally and you just kind of take charge and you just guide them into it, kids are always going to. If you say, oh, we're going to read a story, they're never going to be like, no. And sometimes it's a really fun picture book. You make those connections. They just really like spending time together. They really crave that. So I think, at least for the younger students, that's to have it as like more flexible, but you just keep it in your mind that you're like, okay, a couple of minutes every day. It's just,
Yeah, I think, as far as a fixed time or flexible, if you just make it, and going back to that habit, if you just make it part of your sort of daily routine, that for, 10, 15 minutes before bedtime, you just sit down and read, then it just becomes a habit. And before you know it, they're just reading anyway. So yeah, I would say, you could be a little bit flexible with it, but the more you make it a habit, the more that you're doing it without even realizing you're doing it. Yeah, so to talk a little bit more about the boarding school essay workshop. So that would be for obviously the grade 7 and 8, or looking, moving into the upper primary. So that will be, again, we have a lot of information collectively as an institution about what the different boarding schools look like, what the admissions process looks like. And one of the things that you see a lot in boarding school or any admissions process is that personal essay. So that workshop will be helping get going with the personal essay. And then at the end of the week, they'll have the skills to write essays, and they'll also have not a finished product necessarily, but a really good start and a really strong draft for the essay that they would use for whatever boarding school they're going into. So if you are looking to do boarding school admissions, that could be a really good kind of jump start on the process, because then by the end of that week they have a really strong start to that essay. And as we know, that essay is one of the big things that schools do look at, because it not only tells them a lot about the individual, but it also lets them know a lot about their academic skills as well. Are there any other specific classes that anybody's wondering about?
Okay, so I just saw a parent privately messaging me asking if we could share more about what inspired means and what the whole program is.
That's a great question. Yeah, so that inspired reader and writer, that goes back to our 4-leaf approach. So, and just this idea of we're teaching education and we're doing that ed piece, right? We're doing the academic skills, but we're doing it in a really inspirational, creative way. So it's become the Inspired Reader and Writer Program. So for short, we call it IRW, the Inspired Reader and Writer Program. And that usually during the school year is our cornerstone program in the primary, which is designed to be a one-stop shop for language, linguistic skills, creative thinking, creativity, and key reading and writing skills by age and stage. But then in the summer, we take that same kind of DNA of the program, where we're teaching across all 4 language domains, but we're doing it in a sort of inspired and fun way. And then during the summer, we take it to a whole nother level of fun and creativity where we're doing really interesting things, but still having that core DNA of delivering academic skills in a kid-friendly way. Yeah, and then as far as public speaking, yeah, we didn't really mention that as very much during the program, but we do have lots of public speaking courses as well. And those generally fall within the two different types. So you'll see the public speaking, finding your voice, for example, is really about helping kids find their voice. So understanding who they are, having the vocabulary behind that. There's a lot of sort of drama work around intonation and prosody and fluency and having the presentation skills. And then they're working on a personal, basically a personal speech throughout the week. They're learning all the different presentation skills. And then at the end of the week, they present their final piece. So yeah, so that public speaking is a mix of really the public speaking skills, obviously having those skills to be able to stand up and to confidently express yourself. And then there is some writing work in there as well, because they're writing their stories as well as having those presentation skills. Let's see the next question. Yeah, as far as online or in person, I know we as teachers love having them in person as much as possible, but you know, I think online learning, you know, depending on how the situation goes as well, that could very well still be an option. So if you are interested in online learning, definitely reach out to us, and we can let you know which classes would be available for online learning as well. But yeah, definitely. I think online learning, to some extent at least, is here to stay. So definitely reach out if that's something you're interested in. Megan, do you want to take the next one? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Okay, that question about the creativity, there are some courses that are specifically creative writing, but just kind of reiterate what we said before about how all of our classes work in this little cycle together. All of our classes definitely hit the creative button. Like, it's never just going to be, even for our fundamentals and our deep dives, they are specifically focused on something, but our goal is to create and foster that creativity and give them the opportunity to be creative for themselves, what it means to be creative, give them those skills. So every single one of the courses will definitely attempt to stimulate creativity, but there are some classes that are specifically creative writing focused. So long story short, I will say that all of them definitely will. I think the way to inspire creativity is to kind of see which course is kind of most attractive for your child, because if they're enjoying it and they're into it, they're naturally going to have that buy-in.
Yeah, and that's a really great point that Megan just brought up. Share this catalog with your kids as well and see what they're interested in. You know, especially as they grow up, you know, they become a lot more self-reflective and knowledgeable about themselves than we sometimes give them credit for. But they can probably give you a pretty good hint of which classes they feel that they need to take or that they're interested in taking as well. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was a really fun walkthrough of all the things you should be looking for with your child's development, and then of course some fun things you can do this summer and in general. So definitely use that QR code there on the screen to reach out to us about summer courses, whether you're interested in one of these classes, private classes, coaching, STEM, writing, whatever you're looking for. We have a huge range of options available. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us during your lunch hour today. And we really look forward to hearing from you as parents, what you're interested in. And I know as teachers, we're looking forward to working with your kids this summer.